The offer was $50 million. In the high-stakes world of corporate mergers, $50 million is a rounding error. It is the kind of money a company like Blockbuster Video would spend on popcorn buckets and carpet cleaning in a single fiscal quarter. But on this specific morning in September 2000, inside the Renaissance Tower in Dallas, that $50 million was the price of the future. Sitting on one side of the massive boardroom table was John Antioco. He was the CEO of Blockbuster, a man who wore Italian loafers that cost more than most people's cars. He presided over an empire of 9,000 stores and 65 million customers. He was the king of Friday night. Sitting opposite him were two exhausted, underdressed entrepreneurs from California named Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph. They had flown in on a red-eye flight. They were tired, they were desperate, and their company, a small DVD by mail service called Netflix, was bleeding cash. They weren't there to conquer Blockbuster, they were there to surrender. Reed Hastings made the pitch. Blockbuster would buy Netflix for $50 million. In exchange, Netflix would become the online arm of Blockbuster. They would run the website, handle the logistics, and bring the video giant into the 21st century. Antioco looked at them. He didn't get angry. He didn't negotiate. He didn't even ask for a moment to consult his board. He just smiled. According to Mark Randolph, the CEO of the world's biggest video chain, had to physically restrain himself from laughing in their faces. He politely declined, and the meeting was over before the coffee got cold. Today, Netflix is worth over $250 billion. Blockbuster is a singular, lonely store in Bend, Oregon, selling T-shirts to tourists. That laugh in Dallas was the most expensive chuckle in the history of capitalism. But to say Blockbuster died because they were stupid is a lie. It's too simple. The truth is much darker. Blockbuster didn't die because they missed the future. They died because they were addicted to the past. If you want to understand how titans fall and how underdogs become emperors, make sure you are subscribed to Market Legends. We decode the financial history that shapes your world. To understand why John Antioco laughed, you have to understand the sheer magnitude of the Blockbuster empire in the late 1990s. It wasn't just a store, it was a cultural ritual. The Blockbuster night was the primary form of entertainment for the Western world. You walked in, you smelled the popcorn and the old carpet, you fought with your siblings over which new release to get, and you handed over your blue and yellow laminated card. Blockbuster had solved the biggest problem in Hollywood, distribution. Before them, renting a movie was a sketchy experience in a mom-and-pop store with a limited selection. Blockbuster brought corporate efficiency, bright lights, and thousands of copies of Titanic. They crushed the competition by using sophisticated data to predict exactly where to open new stores. They were a data company masquerading as a retail company. But their business model had a dirty secret. It was a flaw that everyone knew about, everyone hated, but everyone accepted, because there was no alternative. The flaw was late fees. In the year 2000, Blockbuster collected nearly $800 million in late fees. That was roughly 16% of their total revenue. Think about that. The company wasn't just in the business of renting movies, they were in the business of penalizing their own customers. If you returned a movie late, you paid. If you didn't rewind the tape, you paid. The entire profit margin of the company depended on their customers failing to follow the rules. It was a relationship built on hostility, and nobody felt that hostility more than Reed Hastings. The legend goes that Hastings started Netflix because he was embarrassed. He had rented a copy of Apollo 13 from his local Blockbuster and lost the cassette. When he finally found it and returned it 6 weeks later, the clerk told him he owed $40 in late fees. $40. For a movie he could have bought at Walmart for $10. He paid the fee, but the humiliation stuck with him. He realized that the Blockbuster model was broken. It punished people for watching movies at their own pace. He wanted to build a service that was the opposite, a flat monthly fee. Keep the movie as long as you want. no due dates, no late fees. When Netflix launched in 1997, it was a disaster. DVD players were expensive and rare. The internet was slow. The logistics of mailing discs back and forth were a nightmare. By the time they met with Blockbuster in 2000, the dot-com bubble had burst. Investors were fleeing. Netflix was on track to lose $50 million that year. That is why Antioco laughed. He looked at Netflix and saw a gnat. He saw a company with no profits, a tiny customer base, and a business model that relied on the U.S. Postal Service. Why would he pay $50 million for a logistics headache when he had 9,000 stores that acted as warehouses in every neighborhood in America? For the next 3 years, it seemed like Antioco was right. Netflix struggled to grow. They introduced the subscription model we know today, but it was a hard sell. People were used to paying per movie. The idea of an all-you-can-eat buffet for DVDs was radical. But while Blockbuster was busy opening more stores and selling more candy, Netflix was building a weapon that Blockbuster couldn't see. It wasn't the DVDs, it was the data. Netflix developed an algorithm called Cinematch. Because they didn't have physical shelf space limitations, they could stock everything, not just the new releases, but the obscure documentaries, the foreign films, the old classics. Cinematch learned what you liked and recommended movies you had never heard of. Blockbuster's business relied on hits. They needed you to rent Spider-Man because they had bought 500 copies of it. Netflix's business relied on engagement. They didn't care what you watched as long as you kept your subscription. By 2004, the gnat had become a wolf. Netflix turned its first profit. They had millions of subscribers. And suddenly, the Blockbuster executives weren't laughing anymore. They realized that their customers, the ones they had been charging $40 for Apollo 13, were leaving in droves. Blockbuster finally decided to wake up. John Antioco, to his credit, realized the danger. He looked at the numbers and saw the cliff approaching. He knew that to survive, Blockbuster had to destroy its own business model. They had to kill the golden goose. Antioco launched a massive initiative. First, he announced no more late fees. It was a marketing masterstroke, but a financial bloodbath. Overnight, the company wiped out hundreds of millions of dollars in pure profit. Wall Street hated it. The franchisees hated it. But customers loved it. Then he launched Blockbuster Online. It was a direct clone of Netflix. You paid a monthly fee, you made a list, and they mailed you DVDs. But Antioco had an ace up his sleeve. He had something Netflix didn't have: the stores. He combined the two worlds into a program called Total Access. It was brilliant. You could rent a movie online, receive it in the mail, watch it, and then, instead of mailing it back and waiting 3 days for the next one, you could take it to your local Blockbuster store, drop it off, and grab a new movie right off the shelf for free. It was the perfect bridge between digital and physical. It gave customers the instant gratification of a store with the selection of the internet. And it worked. In late 2006, Blockbuster's online subscriber count exploded. They were adding subscribers faster than Netflix. For the first time in history, Reed Hastings was terrified. He admitted later that Total Access was the one strategic move that could have killed Netflix. It neutralized their advantage. If Blockbuster could sustain this, Netflix would bleed out. The war was on. Blockbuster was fighting back. They were burning cash to steal customers, slashing prices, and marketing aggressively. They had the brand, they had the stores, and now they had the better service. But there was a problem. Total Access was expensive. Every time a customer swapped a customized online DVD for a store DVD, Blockbuster lost money. They were subsidizing the war with debt, betting that they could crush Netflix quickly and then raise prices later. It was a race to the bottom. Who would run out of money first? Reed Hastings, the scrappy underdog, Or John Antioco, the corporate titan. As 2007 began, the momentum was shifting. Blockbuster was winning the ground war. Netflix's stock price was falling. The Blockbuster laughed story looked like it was going to have a very different ending. But the most dangerous enemy Blockbuster faced wasn't in Silicon Valley. He was sitting in a boardroom in New York City. And he didn't care about movies or streaming or the future. He cared about one thing, the stock price, right now. His name was Carl Icahn, and he was about to make the mistake that would seal Blockbuster's doom. Carl Icahn is a legendary figure on Wall Street, known as a corporate raider. His playbook is simple. Buy a massive stake in a struggling company, bully the management, force them to cut costs, pump up the stock price, sell for a profit, and leave. He is a financial predator, and in 2005, he smelled blood in the water at Blockbuster. Icahn bought a huge chunk of Blockbuster stock and immediately went to war with CEO John Antioco. To Icahn, Antioco's strategy was insanity. Why was the company spending hundreds of millions of dollars building an online platform that made no money? Why were they eliminating late fees, which was their most reliable source of income? Why were they trying to compete with a tech startup instead of maximizing the profits from their 9,000 retail stores? Icahn looked at total access and didn't see a bridge to the future. He saw a bonfire burning shareholder money. He argued that Blockbuster should stick to what it knew, retail. He wanted them to cut the online budget, bring back the fees, and squeeze every last cent out of the dying rental business. The boardroom battle was vicious. It was a clash of philosophies. Antioco argued that if they didn't pivot now, they would be dead in 5 years. Icahn argued that Antioco was destroying the company's value today for a theoretical tomorrow. Icahn launched a proxy war, a campaign to get the shareholders to vote Antioco out. He wrote scathing letters, gave angry interviews, and rallied the other investors. And because Blockbuster's stock had been struggling under the weight of the expensive war with Netflix, the shareholders listened. In 2007, despite the fact that Total Access was actually working and beating Netflix, John Antioco was forced out. The man who had seen the future and built the only weapon capable of saving the company was fired. Carl Icahn got his way. He handpicked the new CEO, a man named Jim Keyes. Jim Keyes was a retail veteran. He had previously been the CEO of 7-Eleven. He was a master of supply chains, merchandise, and brick-and-mortar efficiency. But he knew absolutely nothing about the digital world. When Keyes took over, he looked at the books and made a decision that makes historians weep. He decided that the online business was a distraction. He famously said in an interview, "I've been confused by this fascination with Netflix. Neither Redbox nor Netflix are even on the radar screen in terms of competition." Keyes dismantled everything Antioco had built. He gutted the Total Access program. He raised the price of online rentals, driving customers back to Netflix. He pulled back on the marketing. And most critically, he refocused the company's capital on the stores. Keyes believed the future of Blockbuster wasn't streaming. It was becoming a destination. He wanted the stores to sell more than just movies. He wanted them to sell pizza, toys, electronics, and merchandise. He tried to turn Blockbuster into a mini Best Buy combined with a 7-Eleven. While Reed Hastings was busy figuring out how to stream high-definition video over the internet, Jim Keyes was busy figuring out how to sell more Coca-Cola and popcorn combos. Then came the final nail in the coffin. In 2008, Keyes and the board made a move so baffling it defies logic. Instead of buying a streaming competitor or investing in their own technology, Blockbuster attempted to buy Circuit City. Circuit City was a failing electronics retailer that was weeks away from its own bankruptcy. Keyes wanted to buy it for over $1 billion to create a retail giant that sold hardware and content together. It was like two drowning swimmers grabbing onto each other to stay afloat. Thankfully, the market crashed in 2008, and the credit dried up before the deal could go through. But the intention showed just how lost Blockbuster really was. While Blockbuster was distracted with pizza and Circuit City, Netflix dropped the bomb. In January 2007, they launched Watch Now. It was a primitive streaming service. The selection was terrible. Only about 1,000 old movies, and you had to watch them on a PC. But it was free for subscribers. Reed Hastings knew this was the real future. He had waited 10 years for broadband speeds to catch up. Now, the moment was here. At Blockbuster, the reaction to streaming was a shrug. They looked at the quality, pixelated, buffering, low resolution, and dismissed it. They didn't understand Moore's Law. They didn't understand that technology gets better exponentially. They thought people would always want the high quality of a physical DVD. But the world changed fast. In 2008, Roku launched the first streaming box. Then came the Xbox app, the PlayStation app, and eventually the iPad. Suddenly, Netflix wasn't just on your computer, it was on your TV. By 2009, the debt that Blockbuster had accumulated, nearly $1 billion of it, largely a hangover from when they were spun off from their former parent company Viacom, became a noose. The Great Recession had terrified consumers. They didn't want to drive to a store and pay $5 for a rental. They wanted to stay home and pay $8 a month for everything. Blockbuster's revenue collapsed. The stores, once assets, became massive liabilities. They were stuck with thousands of expensive commercial leases in prime locations. The overhead was crushing them. Netflix, meanwhile, had no stores, no clerks, no electricity bills for 9,000 locations. They were a digital ghost moving at the speed of light, while Blockbuster was a dinosaur stuck in the tar. In September 2010, exactly 10 years after John Antioco laughed at Reed Hastings in Dallas, Blockbuster Video filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The liquidation was swift and brutal. The blue and yellow signs were torn down. The inventory was sold for pennies on the dollar. Tens of thousands of employees lost their jobs. The company that had defined entertainment for a generation simply ceased to exist. In the aftermath, the numbers are staggering. Netflix went on to produce House of Cards, Stranger Things, and Squid Game. And they expanded to every country on Earth. They changed how we consume culture. They coined the term binge watching. Today they have over 230 million subscribers. And one of the players in this tragedy, Reed Hastings, became one of the richest men in the world, hailed as a visionary genius. John Antioco, the man who laughed, actually teaches a business class now. He is surprisingly humble about the failure. He admits that he saw the threat, but the corporate structure wouldn't let him move fast enough. He is the captain who saw the iceberg but couldn't turn the ship because the owners were arguing about the dinner menu. And Carl Icahn? He sold his Blockbuster stock as it crashed, losing nearly $200 million on the trade. It was one of the few times the legendary Raider got completely wiped out. He later admitted that Blockbuster was the worst investment he ever made. He blamed the management, the market, and the debt. But in reality, he was the architect of his own destruction. He fired the only man who had a map to the future because the map was expensive. The story of Blockbuster versus Netflix is often told as a story of technology. People say, streaming killed the video star. But that's not true. Streaming didn't kill Blockbuster. Blockbuster killed Blockbuster. They had the brand. They had the customers. They had the money. They even had the opportunity to buy Netflix for the price of a private jet. But they suffered from the most common disease in the corporate world, the addiction to short-term profits over long-term survival. They loved their 16% revenue from late fees more than they loved their customers. They loved their retail footprint more than they loved innovation. In 2004, Blockbuster had a chance to become Netflix. In 2006, with Total Access, they arguably were beating Netflix. But they pulled the plug when it started to hurt. The $50 million mistake wasn't just declining the offer in 2000. It was the decade of arrogance that followed. It was the belief that they were too big to fail. It was the laughter in the boardroom. The next time you open Netflix and scroll through thousands of movies without moving from your couch, remember the blue and yellow ticket stub. Remember the smell of the popcorn. And remember that the difference between being a memory and being a legend is the willingness to destroy who you are today, to become who you need to be tomorrow. Blockbuster chose to protect the past. Netflix chose to invent the future. And in the market, the future always wins. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the war for your living room, help us beat the algorithm. Subscribe to Market Legends right now, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments. Do you miss the experience of walking into a Blockbuster, or are you glad it's gone?